Hello, and welcome to the Sleepy Historian. The world outside is quiet now. The day's obligations have been met, and the night has drawn its gentle curtain over the sky. It's time to let go of your worries, to soften your focus, and to drift with me into the distant past. Did you know that for an ancient Greek prince, a lavish banquet, filled with wine, music, and laughter, could be a more terrifying place than a battlefield? It seems strange, but tonight, we'll uncover why, so find a comfortable spot. Close your eyes if you wish, let the gentle rhythm of my voice be your guide, and let's travel back to a world of marble, wine, and whispered secrets. To ask, did Greek princes get nervous at banquets? Imagine the scene. The sun has set over the Aegean, its last rays painting the sky in hues of purple and gold. Inside a grand andron, the men's quarter of a wealthy Greek home. The air is thick with the scent of olive oil from the lamps, roasting meat, and fragrant herbs. This is the symposium, a word we might translate as a drinking party, but it was so much more. It was the central arena of Greek social and political life, a place of pleasure, but also of profound pressure. Our prince, let's call him Lycomedes, arrives not to a chaotic free-for-all, but to a highly structured affair. He is greeted by his host, and a slave anoints his feet with perfumed oil. He doesn't sit at a table. Instead, he is guided to a cline, a plush couch, where he will recline for the entire evening, propped up on his left elbow. He will likely share this couch with another guest, a carefully chosen companion who might be an ally, a mentor, or perhaps a rival he must keep close. The room is lined with these couches, arranged in a U-shape around a central space, ensuring every guest can see and be seen by every other. This is not a private experience. It is a performance on a public stage. Before the drinking truly begins, dinner is served. Simple but hearty fare. Bread, olives, cheese, perhaps some fish or stewed meat. The focus is not on gluttony. The food is merely the prologue. The main event, the symposium proper, begins when the dinner tables are cleared away. Garlands of flowers or myrtle are placed upon the guests' heads, their fragrance a sweet counterpoint to the sharp scent of wine that will soon fill the room. A libation is poured, a prayer offered to the gods, most often to Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and liberation. And then the crater is brought in. This is a large, ornate mixing bowl, the heart of the party, for the Greeks never drank their wine neat. To do so was considered barbaric. The habit of uncivilized Scythians. The wine was always mixed with water, and the ratio of this mixture, decided by the symposiarch or master of ceremonies, would dictate the entire tone of the evening. A light mix for a night of sober philosophical discussion, a stronger mix for a more raucous celebration. The symposiarch, often the host or an elected guest, was the conductor of this orchestra of intoxication, and his decisions held great weight. So here is our prince Lycomedes reclining on his couch, a kylix, a wide, shallow drinking cup, in his hand. The first cup of mixed wine is poured. Music begins to play from a corner of the room. A skilled musician on a lyre or an aulos, a double-reed pipe with a haunting sound. The air hums with conversation. On the surface, it is a picture of civilized leisure, but beneath the garlands and the music, a current of tension runs deep. For Lycomedes, this is not relaxation. This is work, of the most demanding kind. Every single action our young prince takes is under intense scrutiny. This is the social gauntlet. He cannot simply relax and enjoy himself. He is performing his status, his education, his very fitness to rule. How does he recline? Is it with the effortless grace of a man born to privilege? Or does he fidget, looking uncomfortable and out of place? How does he hold his kylix? Does he gesture with it elegantly as he speaks? Or does he slosh the dark wine onto his robes like a clumsy child? Even the way he eats is noted, taking just the right amount, with poise and control. These are not small things. In a world without mass media, A leader's reputation was built on personal interactions, and the symposium was the premier stage for this construction of character. Then there is the conversation. A prince was expected to be a masterful speaker. Witty, knowledgeable, and persuasive, the topics could range from the latest political gossip to the merits of a recent theatrical performance to the deepest questions of philosophy. Imagine Lycomedes trying to follow a complex argument about the nature of justice as posed by a sharp-minded philosopher, while the wine is beginning to warm his blood and the music is clouding his thoughts. He must contribute. But his contribution must be insightful. A foolish comment will be remembered, repeated, and used to mock him. Silence is no better. It could be interpreted as ignorance, or worse, disinterest. He must navigate these intellectual currents with the same skill a sailor navigates treacherous waters, knowing that a single miscalculation could lead to social shipwreck. And the wine, the very substance of the party, is a double-edged sword. To refuse to drink is an insult to the host and to the god Dionysus. It marks you as an outsider, someone who is aloof and untrustworthy. But to drink too much is a catastrophic failure. A prince who loses control of himself, who slurs his words, who becomes belligerent or foolish, has demonstrated a fatal lack of sophrosine, the prized Greek virtue of self-control and moderation. He has shown everyone in that room that he is a slave to his passions, unfit to command an army or govern a city. So he must walk a tightrope of intoxication, drinking enough to be sociable and part of the group, but not so much that his mask of princely composure slips. Every cup is a calculation. He watches the symposiarch. He gauges the mood of the room. He monitors his own mind, all while trying to appear completely at ease. The nervousness is a constant hum beneath the surface of his smile, to add to the pressure. There were the games. The most famous of these was Katabos. Guests would take the dregs of the wine from their kylix and, with a flick of the wrist, fling them across the room at a target, often a small disc balanced atop a metal stand. The goal was to knock the disc off with a satisfying clang. It sounds like a simple drinking game, but like everything else at the symposium, it was a test. It required dexterity, a steady hand, and grace under pressure. All qualities expected of a warrior and a leader. A successful shot would bring cheers and admiration. A clumsy miss would bring good-natured jeers that could still sting the pride of a young prince desperate to prove himself. The entire evening was a series of such tests, of character, intellect, and physical grace. For Lycomedes, the Andron was not a place of rest. It was an examination hall, and the price of failure was public humiliation. Beyond the social pressures, the symposium was a political minefield. These were not simply gatherings of friends. They were critical venues for the business of the state, where alliances were forged, conspiracies were born, and the fates of cities could be decided between sips of wine. For our Prince Lycomedes, navigating this treacherous landscape required a completely different kind of alertness. Imagine his host is a powerful aristocrat from a neighboring city-state. Their two cities are traditional rivals, but a new threat is emerging from a third power. This symposium is a delicate dance of diplomacy. Lycomedes must be charming. He must flatter his host, praise his wine, compliment his musicians. He is there to build a bridge, to create a personal bond that might form the basis of a military alliance. He shares his cup with the host's son. A gesture of trust and camaraderie, he engages in a conversation about poetry, finding common ground, demonstrating his culture and refinement. He is selling himself, and by extension, his city, a well-placed compliment. A shared laugh over a witty remark. These could be as effective as any treaty signed on parchment, but a single wrong word, an off-color joke, a perceived slight, could undo everything. It could be seen as an insult, confirming the old suspicions and deepening the rivalry. The weight of his city's security might rest on his ability to be the perfect guest. At the same time, the room is filled with rivals, There are other princes, ambitious generals, wealthy merchants with political aspirations. Lycomedes must watch them all. The symposium, with its free-flowing wine, was a place where tongues were loosened. He listens carefully to the conversations around him. Who is talking to whom? Who is laughing a little too loudly at the jokes of a known political opponent, a boastful general, his judgment clouded by wine, might let slip a crucial detail about his army's strength or weakness. A disgruntled nobleman might whisper a complaint about the current king, Lycomedes' own father, revealing a pocket of dissent that could fester into a rebellion. The prince must be a sponge for information, absorbing every nuance, every whispered comment, every significant glance. He is a spy in a flower crown, trying to piece together the shifting puzzle of power politics from the fragments of party conversation. And just as he listens for the careless words of others, he must be relentlessly vigilant about his own. The wine that loosens their tongues is the same wine in his cup, a moment of frustration, a flash of youthful arrogance, and he could say something disastrous. He might reveal a state secret, insult a powerful ally, or make a promise he cannot keep. The Greeks had a phrase for this, oinos kai aletheia. In wine there is truth, but for a prince, some truths must remain hidden. He had to maintain a constant internal guard, a sober part of his mind that stood watch over his wine-addled tongue. This constant state of high alert, of performing charm while conducting espionage and censoring himself, would be mentally and emotionally exhausting. The symposium was not an escape from the pressures of his position. It was the very heart of them. This constant political and social maneuvering, while stressful, was still a game of reputation and influence. But the banquet hall held a far darker and more immediate danger. For a man of power in the ancient world, a feast was one of the most vulnerable moments of his life. The nervousness of a Greek prince at a banquet was not just social anxiety. It was a primal fear for his own survival. The most insidious threat was poison. It was a well-known political tool, silent, effective, and difficult to prove. Every cup of wine offered to our Prince Lycomedes could be his last. He would have his own trusted cupbearer, a slave or servant whose life was tied to his own, who was responsible for tasting his food and wine. But even this was not a perfect defense. A slow-acting poison might not affect the taster immediately. A clever assassin might bribe the cupbearer with a promise of freedom and wealth, a temptation that could be hard to resist. The communal nature of the symposium offered some protection. Wine was mixed in a central crater for all to see, and then distributed. It was harder to poison a single individual this way, but a determined enemy could find a way, perhaps by coating the inside of a specific kylix with a toxic substance before it was filled. This constant, nagging fear would turn every sip of wine into a gamble. The prince would watch the pourer. His eyes would scan the faces of those around him, searching for any sign of malice or deceit. The very act of accepting a drink, a gesture of friendship and community, was fraught with mortal peril, and if poison was too subtle, there was always the more direct approach, assassination. A banquet was the perfect setting for a sudden act of violence. The prince is reclining, relaxed, his guard literally down. His personal bodyguards would likely be stationed outside the andron, as it was a breach of etiquette to bring armed men into a private party. The room is noisy, filled with music and laughter, providing cover for the conspirators. A sudden lunge with a hidden dagger, and it would be over before anyone could react. History is filled with tales of treachery at the dinner table. The famous story of the sword of Damocles perfectly captures this feeling. Damocles, a courtier, remarked on how wonderful the life of his king, Dionysius of Syracuse, must be, the king, to teach him a lesson. Invited Damocles to a magnificent banquet. He seated him on a golden couch, surrounded him with the finest foods and wines, but directly above his head, suspended by a single horsehair, hung a razor-sharp sword. Damocles could not enjoy the feast. All he could see was the thread and the blade. This is the perfect metaphor for the prince at the symposium. He is surrounded by luxury, but always aware of the precarious thread that separates him from death. This wasn't just a metaphor, the fear was real. The assassination of Philip II of Macedon, Alexander the Great's father, took place not at a banquet, but during a public celebration at a theatre. A similar environment of festivity and vulnerability. The plot against the tyrant Hipparchus in Athens was planned to be carried out during the Panathenaic festival. The line between celebration and bloodshed was terrifyingly thin. A prince entering a symposium, especially one hosted by a known rival, would be acutely aware that the men smiling at him, sharing their wine with him, could be plotting his demise. He would have to position himself carefully in the room, keeping his back to a wall, his eyes constantly scanning for sudden movements. The nervousness would be a cold knot in his stomach, a stark contrast to the warm wine he was expected to drink with a carefree smile. Perhaps no historical figure better embodies the pressures and perils of the royal banquet than Alexander the Great. His life and his reign were punctuated by symposia that became legendary for their drama, their political significance, and their shocking violence. For Alexander and his Macedonian court, the banquet was not just a party. It was the crucible where loyalty was tested, policies were debated, and the very nature of his evolving empire was contested. One of the most infamous and tragic examples is the story of Cleitus the Black. Cleitus was a veteran Macedonian general, a man from the old guard who had saved Alexander's life at the Battle of the Granicus. He was fiercely loyal, but also fiercely traditional and outspoken. At a banquet in Samarkand, deep in the heart of the former Persian Empire, tensions were already high. Alexander, increasingly adopting Persian customs, was being lauded by sycophants and court poets in a way that grated on the sensibilities of his Macedonian soldiers. They praised him as a god, belittling the achievements of his father Philip. Cleitus, drunk and enraged, could not stay silent. He stood and reminded Alexander of his father's greatness, and of his own role in saving Alexander's life. The argument escalated, fueled by wine and years of simmering resentment. Alexander, who had his own insecurities and a fearsome temper, saw Cleitus's words as a profound betrayal. In a blind rage, he snatched a spear from a guard and ran Cleitus through, killing one of his oldest and most loyal friends on the spot. The aftermath was horrific. Alexander was consumed by guilt and grief, shutting himself away for days. This incident reveals the explosive potential of the symposium. It was a pressure cooker where wine, ego, cultural clashes, and the immense stress of command could combine to create a tragedy. Every prince, every king, knew that such a loss of control was possible, a monster that lurked at the bottom of the wine cup. Another flashpoint occurred at a banquet where Alexander attempted to introduce the Persian custom of proskenses, the act of bowing or prostrating oneself before the king. To the Persians, this was a standard gesture of respect for the ruler. But to the Greeks and Macedonians, it was an act of worship reserved only for the gods. To perform it for a mortal man, even a king as great as Alexander, was blasphemous and deeply offensive to their sense of freedom. The court philosopher Callisthenes famously refused, cleverly arguing his way out of it, but the tension was palpable. The banquet became a silent battle of wills, a referendum on Alexander's identity. Was he a Macedonian king, a first among equals? Or was he a new kind of divine, absolute monarch of a vast Asian empire? His attempt to bridge two cultures at the dinner table nearly caused a mutiny. For the princes and generals in attendance, this was not a simple question of etiquette. It was a moment of profound political and personal choice. To bow or not to bow, their decision could earn them the king's favor or his deadly wrath. As Alexander's reign wore on, and as he ventured deeper into Asia, his paranoia grew. He had survived multiple assassination plots, and he saw threats everywhere. His symposia, once raucous celebrations of Macedonian brotherhood, became tense, suspicious affairs. He would use the banquets to test the loyalty of his men. Watching them, listening for any hint of dissent, the wine was no longer just for celebration. It was a tool of interrogation. Used to loosen tongues and reveal hidden thoughts, the fear was no longer just external, it was internal. Poisoning the very bonds of trust and friendship that had held his army together. The banquet, the ultimate symbol of community, had become a symbol of his isolation and fear, for a prince or general in Alexander's court. An invitation to the symposium was a summons filled with dread. Would it be a night of favor, or a night of accusation, or a night that ended in a bloody argument and a drawn sword? So, did Greek princes get nervous at banquets? The answer is an unequivocal yes, but it was a complex nervousness, a tapestry woven from many different threads of anxiety. There was the social nervousness of the performer, the fear of a misstep, of looking foolish or weak in front of peers and rivals. There was the intellectual nervousness of the debater, the pressure to appear witty and intelligent, to hold one's own in a battle of words. There was the political nervousness of the diplomat and the spy, the constant, exhausting work of building alliances and gathering intelligence, all while guarding one's own tongue and casting a long shadow over it all. There was the raw, primal fear of the target, the knowledge that the man smiling at you, the cup being offered to you, could be the instrument of your own death. The symposium was a microcosm of the prince's life. It was a place of immense opportunity to build a reputation, to forge alliances, to display the qualities of a leader. But it was also a place of immense risk, where a single mistake, a single drop of poison, a single moment of uncontrolled anger could lead to utter ruin. The garlands of flowers could not hide the glint of the dagger, and the sweet wine could not wash away the bitter taste of fear. The prince at the banquet was never truly at rest. He was on watch, always on watch, in the most dangerous theater in the ancient world. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the firelight of the Greek banquet hall. I hope it has given you a new perspective on those ancient gatherings. The world of the past is not so different from our own, filled with the same ambitions and the same fears. And now, it is time to let these old stories fade, like the embers of a dying fire. Let the quiet of the night envelop you. May your own gatherings be filled only with warmth and trust, and may your dreams be peaceful. Until next time, sleep well.